to the Career Corner. My name is Heather Swift, and I'm delighted to be your host. The purpose of the Career Corner is to help people move from career distress to career success. Today, my guest is Tara Favors. Tara is an executive director in human resources in the financial services sector. She's been practicing HR for over 20 years, which means she has very valuable and wonderful experiences to share with us today. Today, we'll be focusing on career development on the job. Tara, welcome back to the Career Corner.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you.
So I know there's been a real shift of focus in helping people on the job training and coaching in different ways with employees and managers. Can you talk a little bit about how someone as a manager could start to train people on the job?
Sure. So a few years ago, before I was in the role that I was recently held, which is the head of leadership development, we thought a lot about classroom training and all that someone can get out of being in the classroom. But as we started to learn more about adult education, we learned that adults don't learn and don't retain knowledge from classrooms, but rather they learn it on the job. And so as managers are thinking about how to develop their employees, really the best way to develop them and even to engage them is to be able to figure out what ways there are to enhance the role that they're doing or enhance the experiences that they have so they can use that for effective learning.
And when someone realizes that, say, okay, on the job, are they sometimes shadowing their employee, or is it kind of like having weekly or bi-weekly meetings on certain topics?
Well, it can be a range of things. So on-the-job learning can be working on a project, giving your employee a project that tests them on experiences and skills that they've never had. It can be an opportunity to shadow someone, so it can be you as a manager taking your employee with you to meetings and seeing the perspective that you have. It can be about that employee teaching someone else. One of the best ways to learn is by teaching. So there's a multiple ways of being able to give someone the on-the-job experiences, but really what it is learning within the context of the work that you do or within the context of the work that they want to do.
And are you finding that most of the opportunities for people to learn on the job or to be officially coached, do they have to be someone that is called high potential or someone who has to be on that leadership up-and-coming track? Or can the average worker be who's doing a great job knowing that they're probably not going to be leading the ship anytime soon? Can they still benefit from coaching, and will people take that time even at that lower level?
I mean, they should. Every job is different, but ultimately there's only so many people who are high potential in an organization. It's usually...
But aren't we all special?
Yes, to our parents, for sure.
Yes.
But to the firm, in some way, yes.
Yeah.
But when you think of the true high potentials, most companies look at a high potentials as either 10% or 20% of the firm. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people say it's 20% of your firm is high potential, 70% is kind of in this middle bucket, and then there's 10% who are bottom performers. Mm-hmm. I would argue for the bottom performers, it's a different kind of development. It's either coaching them up or sometimes coaching them out because there's an experience that's better for them elsewhere. Mm-hmm. But for that middle or that 70% of people, certainly we need to invest time in them because they're the people who engaged. We need them to be engaged to be able to continue doing the work that it is, even if it's just working as a grind. Mm-hmm. You want those people to pay attention to what they're doing. Mm-hmm. There may be special efforts and special kind of more money that you want to put towards that top 20%, but even that middle 70%, it's still important to make sure that you're utilizing their skill set as well. And also, for the middle 70%, oftentimes they have experiences and see things because they're working on the line that 20% or even the manager may not have experienced or hasn't experienced in many years.
That's a great point. It's like really talking to the people that are actually doing the work.
Kind of, yeah.
So what do you need right now? Like how can we support you?
Yeah.
There's a saying that I've always loved, which is if you don't manage your career, someone else will do it for you.
Oh, that's really true.
And I think across every level of every career and every time throughout our ages as we're working, I think that still applies for that. And I think hopefully as we get older, we know what that means or how we can ask for help. But if you're looking at someone who is maybe not that top 20%, and you're a good worker and you're thinking, you know what, I'm probably not going to be promoted anywhere soon, or in many companies, there's nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. So you have to continue to be a rock star exactly where you're at or move out. Yeah. So if you want to seek more job satisfaction and development, doing exactly what you're doing, can you please share some tips that a professional could ask for or some things they could do like on the job?
Sure. So, I mean, I think sometimes if you are in a job we'll call it a job, I don't want to call it a rut, but you're in a job that has some kind of repetitive task, there are ways to develop, but let's think a little bit outside of that too. Mm-hmm. I think that for some of those people, there are opportunities to get development outside of work that they can bring back into work. Mm-hmm. So for some of those people where really that job is the same job and it's kind of doing the same thing over and over again, they may want to even think about where they can develop other skill sets, maybe through working on a board or some philanthropic activity that gives them leadership skills that they can bring back into the job.
Would you know something about working on a board, Tara?
I do. I do.
How many boards are you on right now?
I am on 2.
Okay, that's a good number with everything else.
It's a good number, and I'm also on the PTA, and I'm also so we won't get into it.
I know you have a lot, but you I still look up to you with all the involvement that you bring into not just your family life, your work life, but in sharing your skills across a vast amount of good causes and helping the school, and
You do not have to be so complimentary because I'm doing your show.
I know. That's true. I would have said that off air too. But what are some things the boards have done for you? Like, can you share any personal experiences with
Sure.
that?
I mean, for me, it's been great for networking. So I've met some great people from a range of different industries outside of the one that I work in, and I've worked in the same industry fundamentally for my whole career. So it's just nice to be able to get a different perspective.
Yeah.
I think there's skill sets that you think about sitting on a board that you may not think about in my job, right? So in my job, I think specifically about our human assets, and I don't have to deal a whole lot with budgets. But when I sit on the board of one of the organizations I sit on, we have a lot of conversations about the budget because we're the ones who approve whether or not money is going to get given to our organization. So there's wonderful ways of being able to link the two of them. For someone who's in a job that is, we'll say, not a promotable job, but I actually don't think that's true. I think that job may not be promotable, that person can be. So just because you're in a job that's repetitive doesn't mean that you can't be beyond that.
If they can expand on their skill set and
for sure, and hopefully the goal is to get out of that job and get into a job that does have a little bit more scope and exposure to it. But if you're in a job that's say repetitive, you are really your job is to put a stamp on it every day. There's still no reason why you can't look at how someone else does something. There's still no reason why you can't sit back and say, what's wrong with this job and how can I do it a little bit differently? How can you bring that initiative forth to your manager? Those are the things that I think if you start to think creatively about what you're doing in the day-to-day, you can help to try to really distinguish yourself from others because you're thoughtful. Sometimes it could be you're doing the same thing every day, but you're the one person who said, what happens to that letter after I put a stamp on it? And all the other people are just putting stamps on it, and you've actually thought through what's the full process, or how does that letter get to me in the first place? And you've thought about what's the client experience? So it could be that you're doing that same job every day, but as you're starting to think about it, you're starting to think, well, what's the beginning and what's the end and what's the experience and how can I make this better? All of those are ways to be able to enhance your experience and therefore enhance yourself.
Yeah, it's kind of looking for maybe a different way to change something. You talked about the letter example, which is a great one, or maybe to shorten a process.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people forget to ask the questions behind it because they're like, well, this is just the way we do it.
Right.
And then
that's the worst answer.
It does that for so long. And there's just one story about this, I won't get into it now, but this person did the same thing all the time for one reason. And then the situation changed, but the people after him kept doing it because, well, that's the way we always did it.
Right.
But no one knew why.
Right.
And the circumstance had changed, so it wasn't relevant anymore. But people just kept on. It's like all the sheep or the cows going off the cliff. Like, this is the way we're walking.
Well, and I'm probably going to get it wrong because every time I say this, I get it wrong. But there's two ways to look at your career and your experiences. Did you work someplace for 10 years and have 10 different experiences, or did you work someplace for 10 years but have the same one experience 10 times? So is it how?
And it sounds like you got that right.
Okay, did I? Okay, good. I practiced. But there's so many ways of being able to add value, and that's what managers want. In this economy where really the choices are hard, you want to be someone who stands out as someone who cares about what you do. And as a manager, I think, as a leader of those people, sometimes the leader doesn't actually know what that person's doing, but the leader's job is to be able to figure out a way to remove obstacles for that person so they do it well. So sometimes your role as a manager is not just saying to your employee, I know how to do that, I know how to do that better. Sometimes you don't. But it may just be understanding what your people are doing and then being able to say, you know what, here, let me remove these obstacles for you so that you can do this even better.
And to have those conversations.
Yeah.
I guess that's where it comes down to, too, like how competent is the manager and do they have the skills to help the employee do that also?
Yeah.
I think we've all had people who had a little more competence than the manager sometimes, and that could be a little
then you run.
Yeah.
If you can't change your manager,
run, Forrest, run.
Then run, Forrest, run to go find someone else. Because ultimately, why people come or go for an organization is not so much about the job that they're doing or the organization that they work for, but it's about how much they feel supported by their manager. And when you don't feel supported by your manager, no one can flourish.
No, it's true. And I've heard that there are people don't leave jobs, they leave people.
Oh, for sure.
And at every level, that is a big impact. And people have also stayed because of loyalty and a boss can make or break a really good experience.
Yeah, there's a speaker that we've used who I think is a wonderful speaker, and he does a lot of work with our company, and he talks about traits of admired leaders, and I think he's fabulous. And two of the things that he says.
Who is this person's name?
His name is Randall Stepman.
Oh, nice.
Works for a company called CRA. They're based out of Pennsylvania, and they do a lot of research. And I won't quote him directly, but he talks about admired leaders, and there are two traits of admired leaders. They're leaders who have followership. So there's a leader who people will go with them from place A to place B because that they reflect an environment of positivity that they're admired. And then you have people who are strong leaders because they deliver results. It's very rare to find someone that's both. You sometimes have people who are really strong results leaders and really strong followership leaderships. Now, you don't want someone who just has people who follows, but you can't have results. And you don't want someone who just has results and no followership.
Dead in their tracks,
right?
Yeah.
So when you can find that rare characteristic, that rare quality of a manager who has both, you stick with that person. Yeah.
No, it's true, and that loyalty is something to be very much appreciated and to not overlooked by the organization too. Because when people do leave and relationships follow, that's a beautiful thing. But you want to retain the rock stars the best you can.
Yeah.
When people like coaches are looking to be, or I should say, managers or bosses are looking to also add that coaching element. Can you share like some tips for managers on what they can do? We have about another minute before we need to break, but
Okay.
Are there courses out there or also books that you have found helpful?
Yes. So you're going to have to think about the books a little bit, so I'll come back to you on that. But there's definitely, what I would just say is what really people really want and what managers have a difficult time at is giving feedback. And it's so simple. You give someone feedback on how they did in the moment. You give them feedback on what that positive or negative. So I think sometimes actually people don't like to give the negative and they overlook giving the positive, but you give very specific examples of where someone did well and what effect that had. And as a manager, I think if you can start there by giving honest feedback to your employees, that's golden.
Yeah, starting with the feedback part.
Yeah.
And that's where I think when people, if they can look at feedback as really a gift.
A gift, yeah.
And they can kind of contemplate and say, okay, I'll own this part, because sometimes, there's a difference of opinion when people share that. Like in relationships also, spouses, everything. Well, okay, I'll take that. You're right. We'll own that feedback.
Yeah.
It can be a huge changing experience for them in the workforce of also how they're creating their brand with that. If someone keeps saying, look, you run 15 minutes late for every meeting, people aren't counting on you now because you're always showing up late. That's something that person can easily adjust, where if the manager doesn't say, you're driving me crazy, you keep doing this, then that's just it's also gonna keep hurting the employee without the manager having the courage to deliver the bad news.
Yeah, look, whether or not someone tells you or not, someone has you have a reputation. People have beliefs about you, so whether you choose to believe it or not, doesn't matter.
It is true. Okay, well, we'll talk more about that right after our break. So please stay tuned. We'll be back with Tara Favors, Executive Director at Human Resources, very soon.
Express yourself. Explore teen summer reading at your library.
Hi, welcome back to the Career Corner. My name is Heather Swift, and I'm so happy you're here with us. Today I'm interviewing Tara Favors, a fabulous Executive Director in Human Resources, and we're speaking about career development in the workforce. So Tara, I hear a lot about sponsors and mentors and how it's important to have one of each. Can you please talk about what the difference is between a sponsor and a mentor?
Sure. First of all, it's having someone who calls you fabulous. I mean, I think that's clearly important, so thank you for the introduction.
Can I be one of those?
You can be whichever one of the two that you want, because you complimented me. So a sponsor and a mentor, they are different, and I think they get used interchangeably, but they really do have different meanings. A mentor is, in the traditional sense of a mentor, someone who is who can hear you out confidentially, who you can go to with your problem, someone who you can cry to, someone who you can bat
Sounds like
around
my
idea
mommy.
with. Sounds like your mommy, and everyone needs one of those. A sponsor is different, though. And so a mentor can be at any level, as a sponsor can. But what a sponsor's role is to kind of speak on your behalf, even when you're not there. So a mentor is really your own personal connection. A sponsor is your connection, but they connect you to your organization. And so it's typically someone who feels like they can put their career on the line supporting you. They're the person who, when a promotion decision is being made, says, Heather must be in consideration. Or when a job comes up, they speak about you. Or when there's a special project that comes up, they speak about you. So they play a much more active role in moving your career around, where a mentor is just someone who's going to be whispering in your ear. And ultimately, that's the difference. We talked about books, but Sylvia Hewitt, who works for a company, or actually runs, who started a company called Center for Talent Innovation, has done a lot of research around sponsorship. And you find her a lot on TV. She's on the Today Show.
Nice.
She speaks on a lot of panels. And she's written quite a few books about this particular topic and the importance of people, everyone having a sponsor. And a mentor too, but really a sponsor. And one of the things that she talks about is the fact that women and people of color, many of them, typically the minorities within the organization, especially need to have those. Have someone who has a personal connection to them, someone who has a vested interest in their career, and someone who's there to really represent them. And so we, as women, and me as a woman of color, it behooves us to go out and find sponsors who, by the way, don't need to be women of color, and women or people of color. There's less of us anyway to be sponsors. So really casting a wide net on where your sponsors
Finding some of the
come
good
from.
guys, the good
Some
guys.
of the good guys, yeah.
No, that's interesting. So, what could you share for tips for people that want to find a mentor? Because I know there's been companies, oh my goodness, being in this industry of career development for so long, where it's been a forced program of forced matching.
Oh my gosh, I think those are horrible.
Which never worked.
They never work.
They never worked. But then trying to at least create an environment where it can work, where people can then go ask someone, and creating the leadership team to be open to taking on one or two mentees as part of what's expected of them to create the talent upline and what can be working with the downline moving towards that direction. So how would you recommend for someone goes around if they're shy, or they're on the ivory tower, or those are the leaders and I'm just me, what would you say to them?
It's so funny. For me, I'm so not shy.
No way.
I never had a problem finding a mentor, but I know for some people it is very difficult. I think what works in a mentor is having someone with which you can relate to. And also finding someone who actually cares, right? So I think part of what you want to do is look at the leaders, and they don't have to be the C-suite leaders. They can be someone who is the same level as you, quite honestly, who has traits that you admire.
A little more experience maybe, or something.
Someone who's a little bit more senior than you. Look at those people and follow them, understand what they do. And honestly, you have to just ask. You really do have to ask. If you put yourself out there, very few people will say no. And then you'll figure out what that mentoring relationship means. Does it mean that you're going to meet once a week? Does it mean that you meet once a month? You'll fall into your natural groove if both of you are invested in it. A sponsor, though, by the way, you don't go to a sponsor and ask someone to be your sponsor. Sponsors, I think, are much more organic. So a sponsor, in some ways, chooses you. A sponsor sees you and says, this is someone that I want to propel.
I will put my brand behind them.
I'm going to put my brand behind them. Sometimes, quite honestly, you may have a sponsor and not even know that they're sponsoring you, right? Which is possible. So a little bit different. A mentor, I think you can go out and proactively find. A sponsor, I think, finds you based on the work that you do.
That's nice. So it's almost like hoping for a fairy godmother,
Kind of picks
or
a fairy godman, since like I
fairy
said,
godman, yes, with more masculine wings,
Yes.
Very, very much so.
Yeah.
Have you had, even when you went from different organizations, were you able to keep kind of the same mentor? Do they have to be in your company, or can you kind of have a mentor in your industry, maybe that kind of sees your growth and is a go-to person?
I mean, I think I still have friends from elementary school, so I mean, clearly I keep connections
yes, you do.
everywhere I go. It's great to have a multiple point of views, the same way that I talked about the importance of being on a board and having a network. Is I think having a mentor from within your organization is great, within your department's great, outside of your department's great, and within your industry, outside of your industry. I mean, look, the more that you have, the better. The more points of information that you have, the better you are in being able to think about how you want to manage your career internally, or if you get to the point where you feel like it's time for you to go. Having a network of people who can help you think about how to do that externally. So I would say that the best relationships are ones that you maintain. When you talk about networking, it's about not calling someone when you need them, but calling someone to call them. And people don't forget that. And so as you think about your own career and how you stay in touch with people, whether you move from job to job company to company, the relationships that you maintain are the strongest ones, and not the like Facebooky, LinkedIn networking stuff, because I think that stuff is just artificial. But truly taking the time every so often to call someone, go out to lunch with them.
Old school picking up a telephone.
How about that? I mean, it seems like a novel idea, but like, yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
Those personal connections make a big difference. You know, someone got promoted who's someone who you think is great, send them a note. What does that hurt? Right?
I have someone I need to do that for, actually. So, okay, thank you for that. That's very helpful information, because some people may have never heard the difference between sponsorship and mentorship in that way. I'd like to also talk about the difference between having a personal coach or executive coaching. Can you talk a little bit about the differences and when the appropriate application is, for the right circumstance?
Sure. Well, I just finished this coaching certificate, so I can
Nice.
now speak with a certificate
Hey.
about executive coaching. So the difference between personal coaching and executive coaching. Personal coaching typically is Heather needs someone to talk to. She's going to hire someone. Heather tells that person their point of view, and they come back to Heather and they say, oh, you're doing this right, you're doing this wrong. And it's really about you and that person. Interesting, helpful. But executive coaching is one that companies sponsor employees for, and we talked about the 20-70-10. Typically, you don't spend it on the 70, you spend it on the 20, right? Because executive coaching is expensive.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so you really try to figure out who do you want to invest that money in and what's the appropriate time. Oftentimes, when you think about having an executive coach, it's when someone's at a point of inflection in their career. So they're either going into a new job, or they're taking on a new team, or maybe moving from one region to another, and there's something that's very tangible. But the thing about executive coaching is that it's a whole company point of view. So it's you and that coach, and you two are having a personal connection, and what you say in that room is confidential between the two of you. But they're able to give you feedback based on the feedback that they're collecting from your managers, from your peers. Many coaches, executive coaches, do 360 interviews, so they would get a perspective from you. Typically, what's your strengths? What's your areas of development? What are the things that this person needs to do to take it to the next level? They might ask that of your manager. They may ask that of your direct reports. They may ask that of your peers.
Yes.
So that gets taken into consideration. Also, a lot of executive coaches use quite a few assessment tools, and there's a few assessment tools. The ones that are the most noted is the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs, which
Yes.
everyone kind of knows that I'm an ESFP or whatever. But there's a whole assortment of them. There's self-assessment tools that talk about how you relate in conflicts. There's self-assessment tools that talk about your own emotional intelligence. And so they'll bring all that information in together. Oftentimes the executive coach will put together a report that says, here's your strengths, here's your weaknesses, here it is. And it's probably the best feedback that you'll ever get. And then the two of you work on an action plan. And the action plan is based on the feedback that you heard, but it's also based on what the company wants you to get to. So the difference really between personal coaching and executive coaching is that the executive coaching is done within the context of the organization that you are working for. And that gives it the grounding to be able to ensure that whatever you're focusing on is what the company wants you to focus on, not just what you want.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Especially if they're investing in you.
Right.
They want to make sure that you're hitting marks, or that your blind spots, you can see them now, and to
Yeah.
kind of overcome them. And typically, I've seen tremendous growth in people through the executive coaching throughout
Yeah.
my career, of just cases where the coaches would have such success stories and relationships to really help people get that promotion or overcome obstacles. And,
Yeah, it's
and
a
things like
fabulous
that.
opportunity. I just finished doing, through the certificate class that I just took, a coaching assignment, which was awesome for me to do and awesome for her. The person that I was coaching, when I came in, it was the set of it wasn't great, so she kind of thought she was getting an executive coach because she had done something wrong, which in truth, most companies don't do that anymore.
No,
they
they
really
don't want to
invest.
coach remedial.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't do remedial coaching. But she, I don't think, had understood that. And so when she came in, at first,
First she was like, oh no.
she was. And I said, oh, I'm going to do a 360 interview with some of your colleagues. And she's like, yeah, you're not going to do that. But then after spending time together, I did. And turns out that she really is fabulous at what she does. But really what her area of development was more around, how do I take this view that's a kind of a view of the day-to-day and start to expand that into the view of the larger company. Her managers thought she was great at what she did, but they saw so much more of where she needed to go. And so we explored that in the executive coaching.
Oh, nice. Do you like wearing that hat in your role?
It's really fun. It really is. I mean, to see how could it not be fun to see someone grow and see someone go on and do
Different
flourish.
things, but
Yeah.
no.
I mean, how could that not be fun?
And that so nicely blends into your human resources development background with all the different hats.
yeah.
In that way. So for someone that probably won't be tapped with an executive coach. We have just a few minutes left. What would you say that there are some things that they could do for their own career? Because no one's going to give them a 360, but for their own just kind of contemplations to ask themselves, to say, where am I? What am I doing? What are some things that they could kind of have some introspection on?
Yeah, I mean, take stock of yourself. There are people who say you should spend a lot of time looking at improving your development areas, your weaknesses. There's other people who say, yeah, you need to consider that, but the more impactful thing is to think about where your strengths can be utilized more. Mm-hmm. So think about where your strengths are, and then figure out ways to play up to that. Obviously understand where your development areas are, but don't focus on that as much, because sometimes that's not going to move you as much as, or have as much impact as figuring out what your strengths are. Feedback, as I said, if your manager's not one to give you feedback, get it from your managers, get it from your peers, and when you get it from your managers and get it from your peers, hold yourself accountable, and one way to hold yourself accountable is to find a friend and say, hey Heather, my manager said that I talk too much. When you see me talking too much, just kick me under the table. And then how simple is that? But have someone who's a partner to your own success. Those are two things that I could think of.
I like the idea of having someone who's a partner in your own success.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot, and it's up to us to do the changes anyway, right?
Yeah, it is.
You can have someone coach you forever, and if you're not willing to make those changes or listen to that feedback, that's all wasted opportunities.
Exactly.
If we're in that way. Well, we're just coming down to wrapping up the show, so thank you so much for being here today, and I wish you much success in your continued success.
I wish you the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all so much for joining us today on The Career Corner. We have a lot of great shows on YouTube, so please check us out. The Career Corner on Soma TV, Heather Swift. Until we meet again, I wish you much career success.